Genesys Spectrophotometer. There's a switch in the back. I just turned on the switch. So now this is how it came up, and we are at what's called the Smart Start menu. There are two choices, UV Scan and UV Scan SOGO. We'll just choose UV Scan. So the UV Scan is selected, enter. A bunch of information comes up. You shouldn't need to change any of the settings for your initial scans, but you can read them. It's going to measure absorbance from 200 to 400 nanometers. That's the UV range. The choice I want is Run Test. So this is a button here. The choices are on the screen, but the buttons are below. So you have four choices. In this case, if I press the first one, there is no choice there. It beeps at me. If I press the fourth one, that's Run Test. So it goes through a little check here, calibrating and checking the turret. And now a graph comes up. The graph is blank. What I need to do first is called Collect Baseline. So right here, this choice is Collect Baseline. To take a spectrum, you need a cuvette. There are many different kinds of cuvettes. Their purpose is to hold the sample within the machine. Your standard issue cuvette will look like this. It's got black walls. The volume it can hold is about 1 milliliter. A baseline is going to just be solvent. No substance dissolved in the solvent, just plain solvent. I'm going to use ethanol as my baseline. In this case, I'm going to use the dispensette to measure out my ethanol for the baseline. Should be a measured volume. Doesn't have to be, but it makes it more convenient if it is. So I'm going to do 0.95 milliliters. That's 950 microliters. Could also use one of the pipettes, the micropipetters, to do this. So that is in my cuvette. 0.95 milliliters of ethanol. Put the stopper on. And I'm going to put the ethanol, clean ethanol, in a slot here. So the slots have numbers. I'm going to put baseline in slot B. And I'm seating it at the bottom of the chamber here. The clear faces have to be facing this direction because the light beam is going to come through the solution to the detector. Alright, so B for baseline. Now I'm going to press the button that says Collect Baseline. The machine makes some noises. It's now measuring the absorbance at each wavelength between 200 and 400 nanometers. There's a little meter here telling you how much of it has completed. What it's essentially saying is every one of these measurements, it's going to call zero. It's like zeroing out the paper on a balance. Okay, that beep means the baseline has been collected. If I didn't think it worked well, I could try it again. But I'm ready now to measure a sample. So now I'm going to prepare my sample. This is the cuvette that I use for the baseline. It has 950 microliters of ethanol. I'm going to add to that 50 microliters of my sample. Notice it's got a label. The top also has a label. So 50 microliters, I'm going to use my pipetter. Slow release. Okay, so there's my 50 microliters of sample. In this case, it's an organic solvent. It's starting to drip. So with water, these pipetters will not drip. So actually what I need to do this well, is prepare this side so it's ready to receive my 50 microliters. And pipette quickly enough that it won't drip. 50 microliters into my cuvette. I can see the liquid go in. I can see that I've delivered my 50 microliters into the actual liquid. That's important, especially if you're pipetting 1 or 2 microliters. If you're pipetting 1 or 2 microliters, you got to make sure it goes in, so you got to be looking at it. Put a stopper on top. I need to mix it now. I do that by inverting 1, 2, 3 times. It's now mixed. This sample is going to go into slot number 1. Slot number 1. Close the lid. And now, measure sample. So what it's doing now is it's comparing the absorbance of light of all these wavelengths, comparing that to the baseline. And you can see I've got some interesting absorbance values here. So this is how you take or acquire a UV spectrum. Once I've collected the spectrum and I've got it on screen, I want to label the peaks. Where are these peaks? So there's a button here called Math. I'm going to push that. And my choices, this last choice says peaks and valleys. Label peaks. Right now it's set to off. If I press enter, now label peaks is on. Label valleys is still off. I don't want to label any valleys. They're not important to me. Number of features, I'm going to set this to 2. It can be anything between 1 and 9. I'm going to set it to 2. Alright, so now it's set up the way I want. I press exit or escape to exit. Working. So now it's put peak labels on my graph. It's labeled this peak here and it's labeled this peak here. And it says both the wavelength and the absorbance value for those peaks. Now I'm going to print my spectrum. I press the print button here. And out of the machine comes a printout of my graph. And this is something that you can paste into your lab notebook as a permanent copy of your experimental data. So now, to actually get this out of the machine, I pull up a little bit and tear gently, and now that's my printout right there. After I'm done acquiring my spectrum, I can use a Pasteur pipette to remove the sample from the cuvette. If it's something I want to save, I'll put it in a vial. If it's something I don't want to save, I'll put it in organic waste. With skill, you can get 99% of the fluid out of the cuvette. So I hope that you can see the cuvette is pretty dry.